During the outbreak of what would affectionately be known as pathogen HK, this disease would appear to have its origins rooted firmly in a fairly horrific disease that we know of now. Well, a combination of them anyhow. A fast-acting disease that would have its genetic roots concerning how it would impact the body structure, very similarly to the Kuru disease. And now that should be terrifying enough on its own, because a prion disease, they're just absolutely diabolical when it comes to the human meat suit, or really anything for that matter, of any species on this planet. But why is that exactly? Prions are nothing more than a protein, and you can pronounce them prions, you can pronounce them prions, it really doesn't matter. It's sort of like respiratory versus respiratory, it's the same thing, but there is no genetic material to attack in order to break them down. They are incredibly difficult to denature and exist at temperatures well beyond what typically other proteins would remain folded at, and they can persist in an environment for an alarming amount of time. This is actually one of the major issues concerning the chronic wasting disease that is in the US right now. Should an animal drop that has this prion disease, the prions will persist long after they decompose and could be pushed up to the surface by plants that have grown underneath, utilizing the nutrition from the fallen deer, and which can be eaten by another deer. Prions also have another insidious method of overtaking the body. While it was initially believed that they possibly just kind of built up and the body could just not rid themselves of these proteins, and along with this, when they came into contact with another protein, they would just simply alter its shape, it is now believed there are other methods of recruitment. As a prion comes into contact with an enzyme responsible for folding natural PRPC, or just naturally occurring prions, which is the name for the prions located on the surface of your neuronal cells, it will essentially break this enzyme. As that enzyme goes out, it will begin misfolding other proteins until this ultimately results in your end. Now, that's just part of the pathogen HK. The other background of this disease is quite interesting, as it shows how it is able to spread through a population so quickly. More so in California, a hell on earth if you will. As this disease was researched further, it began to be understood that this specific organism appeared to have genetic information that was related to HIV itself. As we all know, HIV is a genome consisting of two identical single-stranded RNA molecules, making it an RNA virus. Once entering a cell, it comes with its own form of ability to undergo reverse transcription, as it becomes a part of the very genetic makeup of a person. And this indicates why it's so astronomically difficult to remove from a body, as within many cells it lies in wait, waiting to be read to create more HIV virions. In fact, actually, I remember discussing with a fellow scientist back in the day, and she had her PhD and she specialized in this. She's like, I don't think we're ever going to actually get rid of HIV. We started discussing CRISPR. It was kind of an interesting concept, but she did not seem very hopeful that we would ever be able to actually legitimately remove this once it's in a person. But keeping in mind that these two appear to be connected, I believe what we are looking at is more of the virus-inducing prion symptoms. As this disease reaches deep into the fabric of somebody's genetics after they are bitten and it begins to infect the body, the HIV background ensures RNA is reverse transcribed into their genetic coding, which in turn would begin producing enzymes that are maladapted to the human body. From here, prions would begin forming, which with a lot of people results in these staggering shambling masses as their brains are completely destroyed, as we have also seen this readily moving through population centers. But every once in a while, it results in something else that appears to have adapted to the presence of these proteins, making the more powerful cellular structures potentially using those proteins as the basis for cellular activity. While this would take a tremendous amount of adaptation, the results are undeniable while looking at those who were infected and clearly formed new and bizarre traits, from those who kept their standard hominid form to those who were so grotesquely twisted there's no explanation for their survival apart from their body being so radically altered. It would take a new form of protein inducing this durability into their cells to have them survive an infection that alone should have been able to drop them. Yet still, they're able to survive and thrive in these conditions. So for today's episode, we will be discussing the former over the latter. The Crusher is a variant of infected who is absolute swole goals and who I'm actively working to look like. Being a combination of likely pre-existing traits in their non-infected form, their bodies have radically changed in some ways, but still retain a very human appearance, although clearly altered as well. So today, let's discover the physiological changes, and apart from the pathogen HK influence, discuss the neurological changes that would have pushed the body to new heights, quite literally in this painful transformation process. The Crusher stands about a foot taller than your average full-grown adult man. With the average height of an American male being around 5 feet 9 inches tall, this would put the Crusher somewhere in the range of a height of around 6 feet 5 inches to potentially up to even 7 feet tall, given what we see. In non-freedom units, that comes out to 175.2 to 213.3 centimeters, giving this infected a staggering height advantage when facing off against your average person. This growth would imply internally that there are many alterations to the human meat suit taking place in a cascading set of events. but we will get there momentarily. Taking a look at the outside of the body, what's interesting is whether they are male or female, it is pretty much irrelevant. The males and females appear to be of similar height and build, indicating that hormonally speaking, this is not the only thing inspiring these changes within their body. But before moving on to that point, we all know where we need to start when talking about their physiology. Starting with the feet, we can see in a lot of ways there is very little change to this area. It should be noted that structurally, everything remains the same and is just built upon from there. All 5 toes are present and the feet remain in their plantigrade standard human structure. Some even still wear shoes, indicating that growth in this area is not over the top as with the rest of their body. This is more likely due to the fact that there is not a ton of muscle in the feet, and instead, much like the hands, it is mostly composed of extensor tendons and bone. Now, it should be noted that there is muscle still in the area over the top of the foot and on the sides, but it's not overly packed in. So it's not really as necessary as it may have once been, considering we do not really grasp things with our feet unless you're my wife and you pick everything up with your feet. It's very strange. But moving over to the leg, we begin to see some of the impacts of the growth rate this person endured and the effects that it had on the skin. Around the ankle on the front part of the shin, you can see that the skin is essentially twisting in this area. This is likely due to the fact that the skin has undergone tremendous strain due to the growth of the long bones, specifically the tibia and fibular bones of the leg. This process would help explain the height advantage that the infected has obtained. The soleus and gastrocnemius have increased greatly in size, making many people jealous because when getting big, you go to the gym and chicken legs just seem to be running rampant. Moving up to the quadriceps, we again see that the muscle in this area has increased, so much so that if wearing longer pants such as jeans, they will rip the fabric due to the compressional strain brought on by the rapid muscle growth. And in shorts, we can just see how much muscle they have packed on in a short period of time. The skin continues to sport the same twisted appearance, and as it was forced to grow at a cancerous rate to keep pace with the new bodily growth. Moving up to the abdomen, we see the abdominals are typically well defined with very little body fat, and this is likely for a few reasons. The first, that once this growth level is achieved, any fat that was initially on the body would be stretched out more thinly across the body, decreasing its appearance. And secondly, to fuel growth like this, it is also possible the body fat was used as resources for nutrients, which is what we always use it for anyways, which in turn would cause the body to burn through it rapidly in order to support itself. Both can be very much so true in this instance. And it's also, there's a third reason, they may just not have had that much body fat to begin with. So while moving to the pectorals, Bro can lift 800 pounds stone cold. I'm up to 250. Well, this is where I'm trying to get. Absolute alpha Chad goals. The pectorals are extremely well defined, making the crusher able to throw their arms forward with tremendous power, allowing them to break through walls, hit the ground to create a shockwave, or in general, just cause exceptional damage to the uninfected. But what good is having that strength if your shoulders can't handle the burden? The shoulders have been bolstered to the 10th degree. The trapezius muscles, which run superior to the clavicles, have increased in size, connecting to the back and posterior deltoids, which is to be expected because that's where they connect everything anyways, showing that once again, muscle mass has increased rapidly. But this muscle also helps stabilize the shoulder joints, allowing for massive energy, or at least a massive amount of energy, to be transferred through it without completely destroying or disjointing the joint itself. Moving down to the biceps and triceps, every day is arm day because curls are for the girls. Although there is a standard that triceps should be around 55% of your upper arm muscle mass, while your biceps should only take up around 30%. Although a lot of people want larger biceps than triceps for some reason, dude, get triceps, you look swoller. Either way, with these muscles working antagonistically to one another, the size that they are, a punch landed directly would, let's say you got punched in the face by this thing, it would snap your neck quite easily. And if it grabs you, that bicep size indicates that it can likely outwork your entire body in terms of resistance. The forearms and hands are not too much to write home about, as they're there in their standard form. The hands haven't changed too much, which indicates to me smaller, more delicate bones have not been changed, which would mean that internally, some parts of the body are more favored in terms of bone growth than others, which we will talk about when we get to the internal biochemistry and how the structures of the body have changed here in a second. The head of the person is largely unchanged from their original form, giving the crusher a smaller head to body ratio, which is actually prominent in bodybuilding to this day due to all the Trenbolone sandwiches people keep making. Seriously, stay off that crap. Go natty. I'd get around 150 grams of protein a day, take creatine, and drink plenty of water. You will be surprised what your body is naturally capable of when growing muscle, and you don't have to worry about blowing out an aneurysm due to prolonged steroid usage. That crap wreaks havoc on your body. But there is some damage to the face. The mandible appears to have grown somewhat, which may have split the skin, or it is possible that it could have been because of some attack. This isn't present in all crushers, and it may just be damage from an attack, or possibly even the masticator muscles of the jaw growing too large and splitting the skin. But either way, in general, they seem to be doing all right, as everything is in place where you would expect it. there's not really too much of note to talk about when it comes to the head itself. The external appearance of the body is one that shows deeper within there are several issues taking place. Getting a look at the pulsating blood vessels all over the body, coagulation appears rampant, and blood vessel damage is par for the course. In an effort to keep the new muscle mass fed, there's also new blood vessels, like all these sources running all throughout just below the skin, more so in the upper body than the lower body. But what is happening internally to have caused this person to get to where they are now? The first thing to note, it all goes back to the prions. As we all know, the mitochondria is wait, that's the wrong joke. Protein is the building block of all cells. I'm pretty proud of this analogy, so get ready for this, but you can kind of think of it as sort of like a house almost. In a standard cell, or in this case, a standard house, you have the basic components to build, which are concrete and wood. The foundation is poured, and the wood is used to build the house from there. And this is pretty useful in most situations, but when a storm shows up, if it's bad enough, houses can get knocked down. It's a similar thing with cells and diseases. They're pretty good, but if the wrong disease shows up, the cell gets destroyed. With the prions as the basis, the foundation is now spent uranium instead of concrete, and the wood used to create the house is now just a bunch of steel beams. Due to the durability of a prion, this is likely heavily influencing how the cells themselves are built and operate, making them incredibly durable, meaning that typical limitations of the human body are now just not a big a deal, mainly because the cells are stronger, which means potentially it's a lot harder to rip stuff. Sounds great, right? Why don't we do that now? Well, because it's obviously destroying the brain in the process, and there's no way to know that if this was like an actual reality of prions, at least in our universe. Honestly, I've always wondered if maybe prions are just leftover adaptations to create extremophiles, and sometimes they pop back up in regular cells as a response to something. Anyhow, these prions will have far-reaching implications for the crusher. Some good, most bad. And I mean, it's all bad, but in a sense, I mean, I guess it does make the crusher better at hunting in its environment. The good would be the growth of the body. It's clear to me that there is something being dumped into the body in order to create this thing. Much like entering a second puberty, human growth hormone would be released by the pituitary gland in mass quantities, or it would need to be, because, I mean, look at this dude. It's apparent that some sort of overproduction has taken place in this area of the brain, which would likely indicate that the pituitary gland itself is being influenced after becoming altered by the prions, and has just absolutely begun dumping this hormone into the bloodstream. But why is this? Well, if we take a look at those who become the crushers, we can see a common theme amongst them. Typically, that the person was in some form of employment that they would be concerned about the amount of muscle mass that they had, or were working for some other reason. Starting with Becky on her wedding day, that was likely she was working out to build some muscle for her wedding in an effort to tone, which is fairly common for many women to do. In other instances, we see soldiers and officers, and even just the occasional random dude who likes to be big for, no reason, just walking around being massive behemoths. And that is a real thing. I mean, I like being big. I'm not even that big. I just like working out and building muscle for absolutely no reason. I'm sitting in my basement right now, recording what is basically a fanfic right now, talking about zombies. Why do I work out as much as I do? Who knows? But it likely goes back to essentially the 8 portion of your brain that being more bigger is more better. I mean, so you could take on woolly rhinos and whatnot, or the occasional saber tooth, who knows? But in employment routes, such as being a soldier or an officer, there is a certain amount of protection, or at least peace of mind, that comes with being more muscular, as if it comes down to a hand-to-hand sort of deal, you want to be stronger than the other guy, so a lot of men are incentivized to increase their muscularity. This trait would have naturally had their HGH levels elevated as they gained muscle. So after their infection with the already higher levels of HGH, meaning their pituitary gland was already primed to release more than average, this process was taken even higher as the hormone flooded the body. Upon doing so, it appears that the growth plates of the long bones, known as the epiphyseal plates, would be reactivated to a degree, increasing height. And we know this can happen with things like gigantism, for instance. It's just not very good. So along with this, weightlifting and pre-infection growth would have primed the body towards having more dense bones to deal with compressional and bending forces imparted on them by lifting weights. In turn, these osteoblasts would begin creating even thicker bones, allowing for the crusher to reach the height it does without snapping those long bones. As it grew, we can also assume likely there were already elevated levels of testosterone to some degree, unless it was cutting season, which means upon their infection being assured, their body would utilize the same process to increase testosterone production in the gonads of males and the ovaries of females, and it should also be known to some degree that the adrenal glands can also produce testosterone. And believe it or not, most people don't know this, testosterone is related to the amount of cholesterol that you have. So if you have like no cholesterol, it's difficult for your body to create testosterone. So when the body experiences this growth, muscle would be primed for even further expansion. From here, with all the hormones in place, it is assumed that the prions in some way alter the genetics, or at least the HIV variant alters the genetics, to not only just create prions in the form of basis of cells, but also will cause cells to divide more rapidly. And this isn't really that, crazy of an idea, because it just affects the mitosis and the tumor suppression gene, which causes everything to start growing. So this is most notably seen in the muscle mass as the myocytes are continuing to divide. And the thing to realize is it doesn't appear that new muscle is created as far as strands are concerned, but muscle is built up and remains attached to the structures already seen. This infected person does not appear to really have, like I said, these additional strands, and instead just possesses the natural build that all humans have, except amplified. This would mean that the fascia surrounding the muscle would be completely ripped to prevent compartment syndrome of the body, resulting in the discoloration that we see, as blood would have probably initially leaked out all over the body. This would have been an incredibly painful process, as compartment syndrome is said to be one of the worst pains you can experience. And if you don't know what that is, don't worry, Papa Roanoke is totally here for you on that one. It is essentially when a portion of your body is damaged and it swells. The fascia is the material that covers muscle and provides counter pressure, but when muscle is swelling, this causes more damage, which causes more swelling, and it can actually rupture one another, and it's exceedingly painful. The only real known way to stop it is to have the surgery where they actually cut the fascia away, and this allows for the muscle to swell and then go back down to its original levels once it heals. So taking the size of this creature, the strength that it has, how do you counter it, and what would this thing realistically do to you? Well, the most obvious counter is if it doesn't have any arms to use, it can't swing on you. By hitting the arms, which appear to be the most vulnerable area due to the naturally smaller bones, well, somewhat smaller compared to, I guess, our legs and less muscle mass, they can be damaged to the point that they are no longer functional. And from here, feel free to swing away, Meryl. However, should this creature get a hold of you, the strength that it possesses is staggering. One of the things to note, it is not just muscle and bone swinging around, but the motor neurons of this creature are presumably not holding back any of its strength because of all the brain damage that is pretty much incurred. In a typical human, we use only about roughly 40 to 70% of our actual strength, depending on how, if you work out a lot and unlock it through things like weightlifting and focus, or you get an adrenaline dump and you need to survive, that's about how you access 70%. But we really never access 100%, and that is by design, because if we did, we could literally tear muscle from bone, and thus our brain stops us. With the Crusher, this is not an issue. Given that the building blocks of its cells and the subsequent connections that are made are much stronger, the muscle is unlikely to tear away from bone, as the tendons and ligaments are more sturdily connected. Because of this, when striking something, according to Newton's third law, saying every force has an equal and opposite, or every action has an equal and opposite reaction, the force it imparts into the ground is the force it also must absorb, meaning that the shockwave that thing produces to knock people down is the shockwave that also runs up through its arms, into its shoulders, and into the rest of its body. But because it's able to do this, I believe that the brain is no longer regulating the force it imparts, meaning that it is operating a larger body at 100% capacity, given that it has the ability to do things like this. So the best thing I can say about what it does to you, and I would say this is canonical, because it doesn't really do this to you in-game, obviously, but if you remember Gears of War, when that one cog runs off because he gets scared that the berserker is near them, and then he runs into her, that is exactly what this thing could do to you. It will just tear you apart piece by piece with very little effort, and turn you into a meat pile on the ground in just a few hits. But anyhow, I want to thank you guys for watching. If you enjoyed, leave a like, as it helps get the video out into the algorithm, and subscribing gets you notified, as well as tagging that bell. I'll drop my Twitter, Discord, Patreon, and Roanoke Tales channel link, where last week we talked about the Ohio chemical spill accident. But speaking of patrons, I'd like to thank mine real quick. First, I'd like to thank our astronaut, Rosie Kings. Thank you very much. I'd also like to thank our astrophysicist, Des Dancer, as well as our scientists, Arjun Sentinel, Chad the Enjoyer of Scientific Explanations of B-grade horror movies, Logan Satome, Lucian Dragon, Robbie Cruz, and Tyson Nakanishi. And to the rest of my patrons, I thank you guys as well. Your help goes a long way towards keeping everything running on this channel, and I do greatly appreciate it. All right, so that's going to do it for me. I hope everyone enjoyed, and I'll see y'all in the next one.